On behalf of New England Antique Racers, I welcome each and every one of you. It's so great to see everybody here today, past classes of the Hall of Fame. And congratulations to the family and friends and the inductees of this year's class. Last night we got together, some of us at the Best Western, and it really was an emotional time where you can see past Hall of Famers, past champions get together. Gene Burgeon, Ernie Gahan, Leo Cleary, Billy Harmon, I mean everybody, Bugsy, everybody was there, and it's very emotional, and it really struck home with me that that's what this is all about, to have the past classes come and take part like a class reunion. All of us people in the air are really thankful that you all joined today. After today's ceremony, I'd ask that this year's class stay behind. We're going to have a 2008 class picture, just like in school. And I'd also ask that the Hall of Famers of the past classes, as soon as that picture's been taken, we're going to have a group photo of all the past classes. But before we start, it's a part of the day that is full of kind of sadness, but we'd just like to remember past Hall of Famers and some really important people who passed away in this past year. So if you could join with me in a moment of silence for Mr. Paul Tremaine, Dick Egan, and our buddy, Danny Pardee. Thank you. I'd like to call up to the stage the Vice President of the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame to say a few words, Mr. Bruce Cohen.
Thank you, Pete. Distinguished guests, friends, family, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here. It's one of the best days of the year. I'd like to say a few words about our good friend, the late Danny Pardee. He was one of these people, flew under the radar, was so important in a lot of ways for this club, this organization. Danny was the go-to guy. Very quiet, very understated, no nonsense, no BS. He got the job done. One of the things that Danny will always be remembered for was that he was one of the founding fathers of the SK division in modifieds, along with the late Ed Flemke, Bruce Watt, and of course Jack Carew. At this time, I'd like to also say a special thank you to, there are a lot of people who work hard for this day. Pete Newsham, Doug Farrow, Rhonda Blanchett, among others. This last week we could call for Rhonda the Hell Week. People are calling up, where's my tickets? Can I get tickets? And it's quite a week for her, and she does a fine job, and she's one of the many people in there who work very hard without remuneration because they love this club and they like what they do. I'd also like to personally thank my lovely wife, Linda, for putting up with me. And the other week she asked a question. She said, you know, Bruce, I said, what, honey? She said, do friends of yours have first names? I said, why? He said, well, you get emails and messages from Bonesy, from Batch, from Buddha, from Bergie. Do they really have first names? I said, well, I guess so, but that's what they're known as, and they're wonderful people. I'd also like to thank the selection committee for working very diligently on this year's inductees. As I've said in years past, we have a meeting at Ronnie Bouchard's in the spring. We reviewed about 95 names last year, whittled it down to 16 by our people. Certain people are assigned to do biographies. They send me the biographies, we put them together in a book, we mail them out to the voting committee, which is the induction committee, plus the inductees in there. And I think 77 books went out this year. And the final 16 is whittled down to the final 8, today's inductees. Again, I want to thank the committee for their diligent work, and I know they do a great job when people call me and say, hey Bruce, I have a real problem. What is the problem? I think all 16 should be in. It's very difficult to whittle it down to 8. So to the selection committee, again, I say thank you. To the Veterans Committee, that we induct 3 veterans a year. We only have one meeting in the fall, but we are in constant communication all year. And the Veterans Committee basically can select 3 people who essentially raced 50 years and back. And we have a wonderful selection. We have a great time debating, arguing, yelling, cajoling, politicking. And I'm very pleased that the committee works very hard. They're wonderful racing people, wonderful historians, and I just want to give my personal thanks. And I'd like to give a thanks to all the people who are here. And I think if we all look around the room and see the talent that is represented in this room, all I can say is, wow, I'm really impressed and pleased. Thank you very much.
2 years ago, we had an award that was presented to past President Al Feeney for his dedication for building the Hall of Fame, and as past president of NEAR. Last year, for his dedication, we had Danny Pardee receive the award. Right now, I'd like to call Mr. Al Feeney to the stage to present a brand new award. Mr. Al Feeney.
Thank you, Peter. This is a good occasion for me, and it's a sad occasion for me, but we're going to be honoring Danny Pardee. Danny Pardee was a member of NEAR since his humble beginnings 27 years ago. Danny was a spark plug that kept this club going through the hard times as well as the good times. Shortly after Danny passed away on December 28th, the officers of the club decided to establish an annual award commemorating the dedication and hard work that Danny brought to the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. When it was time to decide the recipient of the first award, just one name was mentioned. End of discussion. Everyone in the room knew that this was the only person who deserved to get the first award. That is Doug Farrell. Doug has been involved with the Hall of Fame since its inception in 1997. During the 11 years since the beginning of the induction series, he wrote many of the press releases promoting the ceremony each year. But he is best known for writing all of the biography that occur in the program booklets, starting with the 1998 edition that looked like this. Memories. And then this is the fourth one. This is the first year color, was 2000. All the history of the inductees in the Hall of Fame are all included in these 11 biographies, and they were all done by Doug Farrell. The first color cover appeared in the year 2000 when we moved the ceremony to this facility. Now, this was not a single-handed effort. The first couple of issues, Joe Berthume was his co-editor. The last few issues, Joe Lee Sosucci and the Sellers have been part of the production team. Putting out this program is no easy task. All the inductees have to be contacted and accurate biographies have to be composed. All the other details have to be checked. This is not the only task he has handled. Since 1996, he has been editor of the NEAR newsletter, which comes out 6 times a year. Now I would like to call up Danny's wife, Marie, and Danny's brother, Dave, to present the award.
If Dan had a say in any of this, this would be the name that would come to mind, because he spoke very often of the amount of time that you spent with this club, and he would have been a vote for you.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I'm speechless. I didn't see this coming at all. Yeah, the time that I've spent working on the Hall of Fame has been a really great time for me. My wife Cindy kind of thinks that I'm a nut for all the time that I spend writing the biographies, but I consider it a real privilege to be able to call up all of the inductees and talk to them and get their racing life stories and be able to write those biographies. Thank you very much.
Every year, the selection committee, the Veterans Committee meets to pick through a field of many people to come up with 3 of the pioneers and the true veterans of New England racing. And this year, we have back, once again, New England's most noted historian of auto racing, a man with 50,000 pictures, half of the Pro 9 museum that's in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Not the better half, no. Ladies and gentlemen, I induct the 3 veterans for the 2008 Mr. R.A. Sylvia.
Thanks, Peter, and congratulations, Doug. Well deserved. And both Bruce and Pete have kind of mentioned some of the highlights I wanted to touch on first. That looking around this room, you will see a group of drivers and competitors in varying degrees, equal to any gathering of this size in the country. This year, we've got a great cross-section, a gentleman from Vermont, one from Connecticut, and one from Rhode Island. Thank you, we like that. The state of Vermont is represented by John Gamble, who we had the good fortune to meet a few moments ago, and his lovely wife. John was a two-time Vermont state champion, also won the Milk Bowl, and he's Doug Farrow's favorite driver. From Connecticut, we have George Lombardo. He was a standout in the early days of the United Stock Car Club. He ran from their inception, which was in the late 40s, through the mid-60s, and he was a tough competitor. And when you see George up here, you'll know what I mean by tough. He was a two-time Plainville Stadium champion and amassed over 100 feature wins in his career. From Rhode Island came Fred Lucchese. Oh, there you are. I wonder where you guys were. He started running in 1948. He ran the first stock car race at Thompson Speedway in May of that year, and then he moved down to the Kingston, Rhode Island Fairgrounds, showing his versatility on both asphalt and dirt. He probably most remembered for his cut-down car, the Lazy Deuce. You don't look that old, man. He was a track champion in New London, Waterford in 1954. In the mid-50s, in 1 year, he won championships at 3 tracks, Seekonk, Lonsdale, and Westboro, all in the same year. He won 2 straight titles at Lonsdale at the end of its life, and also was a multi-time feature winner at the Norwood Arena. And one time they ventured down the Langhorne on the dirt, and Fred, never seeing the place before, managed to turn in the third fastest time. So I guess Fred was pretty versatile in his own. So we're glad you're all here today, and we'd like to invite you all to come down here and receive your plaques and perhaps say a word or two. It's John Gamble, George Lombardo, and Fred Lucchese.
Thank you very much. We have an empty seat at our table we saved for Chubby Gershkoff, who sponsored my car for years and years, but we have his daughter with us tonight. Look at her with the camera. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you all for getting me here. Now I don't know what to say. It was a wonderful, wonderful time, all the years of racing, and I met a wonderful, wonderful bunch of people. And I got to thank my wife for being so good and letting me race. And thank you for everything.
Yeah. Same. I want to thank everyone, that's for sure. I have a lot of friends. I started racing back in 1949 to 1972. And I tell you, I've had some wonderful times, and mostly in the northern part of Vermont, New Hampshire. But it has been a wonderful, wonderful time. Maybe it has been. Last night I had a wonderful time over to the hotel, and I did meet a couple of characters over there. I sat right between these 2 characters, in fact. I think his name is Bugsy Stevens and Leo Clary. Anybody wants to hear some stories about racing, or just stories, sat between them 2 some night, I'll tell you, that is something. I'd like to, of course, thank a lot of people. Charlie Ely, the number 88, back in the late 50s, early 60s. And then I had the pleasure of meeting Doug Farrow's grandfather, And I drove the number 32, which is the number 32, which is up front here today. I drove that back in the 60s for Doug's grandfather, and we did win the Vermont State Championship with the car, along with a lot of other. We had a wonderful time out there. 1969, there again I'd like to thank Joy LeCare. Joy races all over the Northeast. Now I thank him too for giving a nice car for me, which, as they said, we wanted to know for that car. So I've had some wonderful times out there, some real good times out there. I want to thank the people that came over 400 miles to see me, like my brother Kenny down there, my son Harry, and my granddaughter. There's a lot of people that we've had a lot of fun over the years. I mean, good many years. And like I said, my wife, my heavens, don't let me forget my wife. In the fall of 1967, I had this fan come down and ask for an autograph. And she talked to me quite a while. And then, by golly, the next week she's right back there again. Evidently, she would need another autograph. So we talked quite a while again. And that was over 40 years ago, like my wife, Joan. This is a wonderful organization. I want to thank them very much for everything they've done for me. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, one thing I forgot to do when we started this ceremony, at this time I would like to ask all of the former classes of the Hall of Fame to please stand at this time and be recognized. Can we do that right now? All past classes that are in attendance today, please stand and be recognized. It's great to see so many of the past classes come back and to contribute to this ceremony. Thanks, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of New England Antique Racers, we welcome you once again to the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame induction ceremony for 2008. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce the MC, backed by popular demand, Mr. Matt Buckler.
Well, thank you, Pete, and hello again, everybody. And I think we'll start the festivities by having a little informal vote here. You know, they do it all over New England. How many people, when they grew up and followed auto racing, kept a scrapbook? Well, for the next 90 minutes, that scrapbook is going to come to life. You look to your left, you look to your right in this hall, you see some of the legends of New England auto racing, and we're going to meet the latest crop of legends, the Hall of Fame class for 2008, in just a few moments. Now, if you're one of those who have a yellow stripe in back of your chair, indicating this is your first Hall of Fame dinner, well, let me tell you what you're in for. We don't have the big flashy videos, the big music, fireworks. We have something better. There's only one thing that hasn't gone up in motorsports in the last 50 years. Those are the memories. And you know, the stories are just like wine. The older they get, the more intoxicating they become. So we're going to have some great stories today, and just sit back and relax and get ready to be entertained for the next 90 minutes. Now, the person who will be putting his foot on the gas pedal first to get us started is not just a member of NEAR, he's also a member of the Maine Vintage Race Cars Association. In 2004, he was the first person to get the President's Award from that organization, and I'd like to see his garage. I bet it looks more like an airplane hangar because he owns 7 vintage cars, and he's a part owner of 3 more. Let's welcome a man who's joined us all the way from Maine, Steve Pellerin.
Evidently, Matt's been over to my house talking to my wife. He's seen the size of the garage, I guess. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2008 Hall of Fame inductions. This last Sunday in January brings us together again to remember the legacy of New England auto racing and honor a new group of inductees. The New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame honors these pioneers from Maine to Rhode Island, and in some cases, beyond. Here, a proud past is forever enshrined for us as grateful witnesses to recall, and for future fans to appreciate what's taken place. The recent movie by Clint Eastwood, Flag of Our Fathers, tells us the best way to honor our heroes is to remember the way they were and what they did for us. Accordingly, today, more names are going to be added to NEAR's immortal scroll. Also, the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame, and everyone connected with it, offers their congratulations to the inductees today. Our first inductee, Dave Darvo, was one of 7 children raised in the harsh pre-war times of the Depression at Chelsea, near Augusta, Maine. Like many in that time, he went to work early. Dave found his way to a garage to help out. His mechanical talents soon blossomed as he learned his way around, and he'd heard of auto racing at nearby Unity Raceway. In 1952, Bob Knowles' Unity Raceway, in its 4th year of operation, was a dusty, dirty, noisy third-mile dirt track. Dave went and took one look. That was it. He ran home, and the next week returned with a 40 Ford coupe he dragged out of a field and won the first heat race he entered. He was off. But even back then, jalopies took money, folks, as something that he'd had little of. Dave did know in his time in garages that a lot of them had a pile of junk out back or secondhand parts. And those junk piles would become a huge asset to him throughout the years. He put his talents to work early on, taking an outboard motor out of a junk pile and turning it into a chassis jacker that he could use on his car while he was racing. The following year, he won his first feature, and by 1955, David was a force to reckon with at Unity, winning a pile of events en route to his first championship at age 19. Unity, like other tracks in New England at that time, was undergoing changes. The jalopies were shedding their post-war image, turning into chopped-up cut-downs. The flatheads were being tossed in favor of V8s, and Dave kept up with 2 homemade cars on a used parts budget. He'd have one major sponsor, a salvage yard, which would stay with him practically his entire career. In 1964, a vicious end-over-end rollover in a heat race at Unity left him with a crumpled race car. The crew went to work, however, and that night at the feature time, Dave joined the lineup at the rear of the field. When the race was over that night, number 8 sat in victory lane. Fans and drivers throughout the region felt that Darvo was unstoppable, and the name the Chelsea Choo Choo was born. A year or two after, late models took over at Unity, and Dave, still an open-wheel man at heart, hit the road. He ran at places like Ellsworth and Machias, at Cherryfield, Maine, a half-mile dirt track where he was paid on more than one occasion to leave number 8 right on the trailer. In '66, he also ran the modified race at Oxford Plains, one of just a couple of local cars to qualify for that event. He ran in the top 10 for many laps, following people like Donnie McTavish, Bill Slater, and Ed Flemke, before a belt and water pump dropped him out of that event. In '67, Dave began the 2.5-hour ride down to Beach Ridge on a weekly basis, and also picking up races at Arundel Speedway. He soon became a regular at Beach Ridge, but it wasn't easy, folks. A Friday night run at Arundel Speedway left him with a blown motor. The crew got home at midnight and started dragging through the junk pile till they came upon another old block. They dragged it into the garage, and they picked up main and rod bearings from a customer's prior repair job and put them back in the motor. By sunrise, the motor was pretty much done. They put it in the car. That afternoon, they made the trip to Beach Ridge with the car running so that the motor would break in a bit before they had a chance to race it that night. Because of Dave's points, he started in the rear of the field, methodically worked his way to the front. On a late race restart, Ralph Cusack, in his old ride, pulled alongside to Dave and pointed to water coming out the exhaust. Dave looked down, looked at his gauge, looked over at Ralph, and showed him a pair of hopeful crossed fingers. On the restart, Dave sped away, and the motor held on long enough to take the win. Dave won a lot of trophies at Beech Ridge in '69. But I guess the biggest trophy that he also got, he won the heart of Miss Beech Ridge, the trophy presenter at the time, Rita Skillings. She became his soulmate, teammate, and they've spent nearly 40 seasons together now. Rita is our escort for the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame as well. Dave did very well at Beech Ridge with many wins and a title, pleasing his large legions of adoring fans, many who'd come to the races dressed in yellow and black. Also about that time, Dave tried a trick of trying to enter a 100-lap open for late models at Wiscasset Speedway. Having a cut down, he had to circumvent the rules a bit by going out and gutting out a Rambler body and throwing it on his cut down. He got onto the track, passed most of the officials before track owner Wilfred Cronk saw him out there with the shell on there and tossed him. For years later afterwards, rules for open comps in Maine would read, stock body, stock firewall, stock location. This means you, Davo. Dave soon followed up with a legal Chevelle late model, racing closer at home to Wiscasset, Unity, and Speedway 95. He wanted all of them. He was hauling his car at that point on a double-decker type of trailer. And this would allow the crew occasionally to work on the car while they rushed from one event to the other, because often they'd run 2 races in one day. At Oxford Plains Speedway in 1974, for the very first Getty event of the season, Dave allowed himself a one-time luxury in his career. He bought a complete set of new tires, put them on the car. Dave took the lead around lap 40 on a very cold, raw, and windy day, despite heavy pressure from Stan Meserve. Snow and rain began to fall on lap 75, giving David the win that day. Stan, who finished second, had previously sold those tires to David, opting instead to pass on that harder compound. He won the first NASCAR Series weekly title in Maine at Wiscasset Speedway. Into the 70s and early 80s, he won nearly a dozen 100-lap events throughout central Maine on a budget that would embarrass a lot of people. His last title was at Unity in 1983, taking every major event there. During that time, not content to sit idle, he also managed to drive a modified and a late model on the dirt at Beech Ridge and win at the same time. He stepped out of the seat soon thereafter, ending a 4-decade career of building, driving, and maintaining nearly all of his cars. All on his own. 250-plus wins, 10 titles, a hard charger at Beech Ridge, first member of the Unity Raceway Hall of Fame, and a member of the inaugural class of the Maine Motorsports Hall of Fame 2004. He'd tell you very modestly that he didn't do much, he just wanted to race. But his statistics and his abilities behind the wheel state otherwise. So I'm happy to ask the Chelsea Choo-Choo, Dave Davo, and his crew chief, Rita, to come on up and accept his induction into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame.
I started this all when I was 16, and at 16 you don't know where you're going. And lucky I went to the racing path, because if I'd gone the other way, I'd probably been in jail today. And I really enjoyed my life of racing. I've had a good time. I guess I've done a lot of things, but it really kept me on the straight and narrow. And that's about all I can say to that. You know, and thanks to everybody. And she's probably got more to say about it than I have.
Okay.
She can remember more.
You stay right
Okay.
here. Thank you, Steve, very much for that wonderful, for that wonderful induction of Dave. I want you all to know that Steve had asked me to write down some of the things that pleasured Dave the most. His answer to me was women and racing.
Nah.
Then he smiled and said, I better stick to racing. So I wrote this little poem here to kind of do something different for you people today. When you start out with a hobby, you look at everything with open eyes. So while walking through the pits, he got ideas from some of the guys.
Yeah, and I stole them all.
So at the age of 16, I bought a car, took it out and won the race. Caught hell from old Mac Tilson and left without an embrace.
Yeah, he was a friend of mine. He wasn't a friend of mine afterwards.
I once took an outboard motor, and I used the lower half. I made chassis adjustments while racing, which made some of the drivers laugh.
Yeah, they know I wasn't going fishing.
One time I had an oil leak and said, "Oh, son of a gun." Went to the pits and found the problem and patched it with chewing gum. He did that.
You heard of gummed up engines? I had one.
Although I raced at many tracks from Maine to the Florida coast, my favorite was Beach Ridge Speedway and kissing Miss Beach Ridge the most. Which one?
All of them.
I've never been able to take credit. Even today, I never could. But I still get asked for an autograph, so I guess I must have been good.
I forgot that.
Friendly.
It might not have been good, but I was friendly.
Dave always says you should speak your mind and let everyone know how you feel. For knowledge is the key to success, especially when you're behind the wheel. Dave's racing career lasted 40 years on most of the tracks in Maine, so we sincerely would like to thank you for inducting Dave to the Near Hall of Fame. We would also like to give special thanks to David's pit crew, his friends and family for their devoted hours of love and labor spent on the race car. And once again, thanks to the Near Association for honoring Dave as a member to the new Hall of Fame. Dave is, as our son put it, my dad, my hero. Thank you.
Well, Dave, if it wasn't for racing, if you didn't want to go into racing, you and Rita could have gone on vaudeville, I think, because that was quite a presentation. Huh? Dave Darbo, our latest member in the Hall of Fame. Now, how many people here came from Maine this weekend? Well, considering the price of gas, to come all the way from Maine, it can only mean one thing. Dave, you're still popular. Now, our next presenter, well, his first race he covered in 1971, something known as the Schaefer 500. Now, you don't see Schaefer at the track anymore, but you do see this man because he's covered the sport of auto racing for almost 40 years in a variety of newspapers. Making the next presentation, Pete Vanderveer.
Isn't this a great day for auto racing in New England? I think we should all give ourselves a hand, but I'm told that I've got to speed this up. Please give yourselves a hand. Isn't this a great day for auto racing in New England? Wow, Pete Zanardi. I think I read Pete Zanardi stories when I was a little boy. Before I get into the prepared part of this speech, I just want to cast a little light on a great friend of many years. You know, we all have these positives and then we have these little negative nuances that we all have them, and you know, they can drive you crazy. Well, before I prepared the speech, I said, what is there about Peter that could really drive you crazy? And I came up with one word: cigarettes. Any of you out here who were smokers, and I was for quite a few years, knew that when Peter approached you, one of the first words were, have you got a smoke? Peter smoked more of other people's cigarettes than his own along the way. But here's what I really want to say about Pete Zanardi. Loyalty, literary prowess, and a legacy that will last for a long time in New England racing circles can all be nicely packaged together when you're talking about the over 4-decade writing career of Peter Zanardi. Anyone who's had the time to spend with Peter knows that he's loyal to the letter. Perhaps that has something to do with his generation. His grandparents immigrated here from Italy, and staying close together was an imperative part of how people of that time lived their lives. Veteran sports writer and colleague Charlie Mitchell had this to say about Peter. Once he's your friend forever, Mitchell said. The two have known each other ever since the late 1960s when Zanardi was covering racing for the Hartford, Connecticut Times, then the paper with the largest circulation among Connecticut dailies, and Mitchell was working for the Norwalk, Connecticut Hour. Peter presented racing in print in such a way that it couldn't help but influence other writers, Mitchell said. I went to my sports editor at the time and told him if a paper the size of the Hartford Times could cover the sport, we should too. In that way, Peter helped me in launching my career as a motorsports journalist. Zanardi's writing in the Times came during modified stock car racing's golden era. When you read one of his stories in either the Times or a little later in Stock Car magazine, he brought the racers of that era to life. You got to know more about Ed Flemke Sr., Bugsy Stevens, Ron Bouchard, Richie Evans, or Bill Slater than just who they were as drivers. Most everybody else gave you the black and white version of those guys, said Mark Bones Bercier, who at the time was a teenager but a person who had the yearning to become a writer. Peter put them into Technicolor. Bercier relates that he will never forget an April 1974 Stock Car Racing magazine story Peter wrote about Evans. I found it cool because I learned that writers could actually hang out with the drivers, Bercier said. Pete Zanardi was able to bring me that close. He opened his piece in Coal Yard Charlie's, a bar that Richie lived above in Rome, New York. The images were so vivid that you could actually smell the cigarette smoke. It made me want to be a writer. From the Hartford Times, Pete Zanardi moved on to the New Haven, Connecticut Register, where he worked from 1976 through 1980. He also turned his attention to Val Lasser's Speedway scene and continued doing work for Stock Car Racing and Circle Track magazine. When Dean Nardi and Bones Bercier came up with the concept of what would become Trackside magazine in 1980, Zanardi became the guy who they went to. Through his efforts and superlative writing, Trackside magazine became a premier publication before it ceased operation in 2002. There are other sides to Pete Zanardi. In the early 1970s, he became an integral member of the Stafford Motor Speedway's Public Relations Department. Peter returned to Stafford in 1990 when Mark Arute took over the operations at the track. I was a young intern working at Stafford when I first met Peter, said present Hartford Courant sports writer Sean Cushane. At the time, I didn't know much about racing, and I never thought I would be covering it for any length of time. But Peter put the bug in me. Being around him made me realize how cool the sport was. When the management team at the Waterford, Connecticut Speed Bowl, led by Terry Eames, when looking for a person to take over the track's public relations department, they looked no farther than Chester, Connecticut. Pete Zanardi became the perfect fit. After all, he grew up at the track. Although he slowed down some, Mr. Z is still the PR boss at Waterford, where he's loved by all of the competitors, young and old. When I'd see Peter coming into the pits, and I'd see that smile, said longtime competitor Jerry Pearl, the track's 1993 champion. Peter was always good for a story and sometimes an off-color joke. I knew that it was going to be a good night once I had a chance to talk with Peter. Peter's virtues, however, stretch out past racing. I have had a few personal crises over the years, and he's always been there to lend a listening ear. He's been a devoted husband to his wife, Jane, a great father for his son, Mark, and his daughter, Lynn, and now your typical doting grandfather. Peter's work with his church and other charity groups, along with his political leadership that he's shown in Chester, needs to be credited as well. Writing awards over the years have been numerous. His writing talents have gone out beyond racing to baseball and soccer, two of his other favorite sports. I'm expecting Peter to downplay this award today because that's his typical nature, but it is really my distinct pleasure to present Mr. Peter Zanardi for induction into the 2008 New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame.
Charlie, I really never knew I was that good. I want to congratulate all the other inductees, every one of which has achieved something driving or building race cars. I can't remember as much as backing one off a trailer. And when it comes to working on them, Ask Bill Slater what I could do with a wrench. I had a lot to do with Bill retiring as a driver. So I'm here today on top of a mountain, forced to acknowledge the culmination of just some tremendous good fortune. How fortunate is it that I can celebrate this greatest moment, maybe the greatest moment in my professional life, with my wife Jane, my children Mark and Lynn, my brother Jimmy, and just a whole lot of good friends. And how fortunate was it that I got out of college looking for a job. I wanted to be a political writer. The only position open was in a sports department. And then how fortunate was it that you go to the Hartford Times and you meet a sports editor that wanted auto racing covered the same way we covered football and basketball and baseball and soccer. He demanded that. How fortunate is it that you get this job and there are people running around like Wimbo and Charlene and Gahan and Harmon and Narduzzi and Burgeon and Stevens and Flemke, Cleary, Zimmerman, Miller. I mean, how fortunate is that? Just a bunch of great stories looking for a media outlet. I pray that I justified the faith those guys showed in me, because it certainly changed my life. How fortunate is it that you get to share a profession with people like Charlie Mitchell and Pete Vanderveer and Walt Renner and Lou Modestino. Despite all that fortune, I tend to wander off in the weeds a whole lot of times. So there were people out there, people like Mark and Jack Arut, people like Bonesy and Terry Eames and Val Lasur and now Jerry Robinson, that rescued me. I mean, that's just plain fortune, you know, like, and R.A. Sylvia, my God, do we realize what that man does for us, all of us, in collecting our history? He's been collecting it for so long. How good he is to every single media guy in New England. And Bill Slater. The first story I wrote at the Hartford Times was about Bill Slater. I woke him up. He was working at Pratt & Whitney in the evening, in the night shift. I woke him up. And after a few mumbles, which he still does, by the way, after a few mumbles, I did the story, and it began a relationship that continues to be just so very, very important to me. Bill, joining you in this August group is indeed very, very special. Danny Pardee. I mean, that was like the greatest fortune ever, knowing Danny, and I miss him terribly. I miss his wit, and I miss his knowledge, and I miss his advice. And it would be at this point that Danny would say to me, "Hey, Paisan, that's enough. You've made your point. Sit down." Well, I'm going to take Danny's advice. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this very special day.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the cell phone right now, to give his congratulations to Pete Zanardi, is Chrissy Conamacki. Pete?
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Chris. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Chris. My brother will be glad to hear that.
Keep him on the line.
You will repeat everything that's being said.
I will, Chris, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pete Zanardi.
Now it's time to bring up another Hall of Famer to make our next presentation. You know, there's so many channels and so many satellite systems and so many races on the tube these days, and this man somehow has been able to keep track of that for years. And he's also a winner of the Jack Ratto Award here from the New England Racing Hall of Fame. Let's bring up Lou Modestino.
Your near program that you have in front of you tells it all about Joe Brady. Joe Brady is the working man's racer. Everyone knows Joe, and he's always been under the radar. He's been around for years and has accomplished a lot. He's never been high profile, but today he's finally recognized. I'm proud to present Joe Brady for induction into the very prestigious Near Hall of Fame.
I want to thank everybody for being here, joining me for this and everything, but I think it all starts out with my father taking me to Norwood Arena when I was a little boy in the 50s and introducing me to this sport that I've never let go of. So, and seeing my favorite drivers, Hop Harrington and Leo Clary, driving, and then they ended up driving for me, as many other championship drivers and drivers, you know, from all over in all sports. We've won in 5 decades, and we've really accomplished a lot with all the drivers. It'd be hard to pick one over the other. They were all great, and we had great accomplishment and everything too. And it's all about people too that helped us racing out. And the guys out here, Marvin Richard, that helped us immensely with the tires, Dave Lynn Tire, and Sunoco Race Fuels, and all of them that helped along the way. And then I have to thank my family and the crew members that have been with me, some a long time, some haven't. The one engine Joe Garria that was with me for years and years, the most dedicated person you could ever want. And you know, we lost him. And my good friend Armin Durant, my brother-in-law David Beals, a senior. And then I got the current crew of Scott Anderson and Rob Claret and Dennis Costa and John Jenkins, my son Brian, and my wife and my daughter and everybody that helps out and everything too. So this couldn't be any greater today than what is going on here. And then especially the whole racing family here. And I gotta thank everybody in the racing family. As some may know, some may not know. In 2007, my wife and I in the fall had some pretty rough medical issues there. And with all your prayers and thoughts, it pulled us through and everything. And I gotta thank every single person for that. God bless you, thank you.
Now, our next presenter, he has the distinction of writing about people who are known by their first name. People like Tony and Bugsy and Richie and Eddie. He's written some of the great books about auto racing. When you read those stories, you could almost taste the Plainville Stadium hot dogs, which means that he grew up at Plainville Stadium. And I think when he was there, one of his heroes was a man that he will be presenting into the Hall of Fame. Let's bring up one of the great authors and writers in our industry, Bones Boussier.
Thank you, Matt. I would echo what everybody else said about this being just a great day. I had to pick up Bugsy Stevens at the airport yesterday, which is an event in itself. And on the way back, we kept hearing this radio commercial about something called ED. I still don't really get it, but they said on the radio advertisement that if you had an erection lasting longer than 4 hours, tell your doctor. And Bugsy said, "The hell with my doctor, I'm telling everybody." On a more serious note, I would echo what everybody said today about Danny Pardee. I remember in the middle 70s going to the great Paul Tremaine's movie party at Stafford Speedway. And Danny would have, the movie party back then was just an excuse for all of us to gather during the winter and drink beer and tell lies. And Danny would have a TV set up with vintage movies from Waterford and Plainville. And this was before Near and before the Hall of Fame. And for a kid like me, it meant the whole world to watch guys like George Lombardo on 8mm film and all these people. So, I mean, Danny was a guy that not everybody was, he was into history before history was cool, like the country music song says. And what he did for people like me and for a lot of people in this room, I will never forget. So, God bless Danny Pardee. Thank you. In introducing our next inductee, I first have to tell a story involving another of our honorees. It was almost 30 years ago when I was still a teenager that I first met Joe Brady. One day, Joe and I were discussing something that had happened several years earlier when he and Bobby Santos had entered one of Plainville Stadium's great open competition modified shows. Joe Brady knew that I had grown up going to Plainville, and he was laughing about how the crowd was really tough on outsiders. I remember that night pretty well. Santos had finished second, which at Plainville was an excellent showing for an outsider. And Brady said, quote, "As we were pulling out of the pits to go home, I saw this young kid standing there, and I thought he was going to wave at us as we drove by. But then this little so-and-so, only Joe didn't use the word so-and-so, this little so-and-so bent down and picked up this big rock and threw it right at our ramp truck. And it only fell short by that much." And I looked at Brady and said, "Yeah, well, if I'd been just a little older, a little bigger, and a little stronger, I'd have hit that truck." The truth is that that kid wasn't me, but I know how he felt. My whole world in those days revolved around Plainville. And although I loved it when the outsiders showed up, Flemke, Wyckoff, Glazier, Bouchard, Fiandaca, I also loved it when the local boys defended their home turf, which was my home turf. Which brings us back to our inductee. Dave Alkis won the feature that night, beating Santos and thus upholding the local honor. No surprise, because in that period, the early 70s, Alkis won everything at Plainville. 50-lap weekly show, Wednesday night 100-lapper, it didn't matter. Alkis, aboard Roland Sears 54, at first a coupe and later a Vega, was going to be the guy to beat. At his peak, Alkis won 5 track championships in a 6-year span and dozens of features in his long career. No one who watched him will ever forget how he did it. Arms straight out, sawing at the wheel, slashing through traffic from the 7th or 8th row all the way to the front. Plainville was a flat quarter mile, and its cars always seemed to be about 3 years behind the latest modified technology. Not even the best Plainville ride was what you'd call nimble. You didn't finesse your way from 16th to 1st at that place, you muscled it. Dave Alkis, built like a human bulldog, all 4 arms and no neck, was the right man for the job. My pal Bruce Cohen jokes that the lineups at Plainville read like an Italian menu. Membrino, Mordino, Mordenti, Bergenti, Gololo, Spazzano. But the fact is, there were some serious race drivers at that place. From Jimmy Cash to Bob Viveri, from Elton Hill to Donnie Moon, from Ronnie Vaness to Dave's brother Fred Alkis, plus a couple of scrappy kids named Stan Greger and Reggie Ruggiero. Plainville was crawling with hard-nosed characters. When things were going good, they knew how to pass. When things weren't going good, they knew how to keep from being passed. And when things went really wrong, they knew how to fight. They didn't hand pit passes to wimps at Plainville Stadium, and Mr. Alkis might have been the toughest guy at a very tough joint. I asked car owner Roland Sear, an ex-driver himself, what made Dave Alkis so good, and the answer came quickly. Quote, "He was aggressive. If there was a hole that opened just for a split second, Davey would go for it every time," unquote. Of course, Roland didn't exactly discourage Dave's enthusiasm. He remembers telling Alkis, quote, "If you don't expect to ever bend it, don't bother driving it." Now, who wouldn't love a car owner like that? The other day, I looked through one of Dave's scrapbooks, and the bold print on the newspaper clippings inside took me back in time. Alkis wins opener at Stadium. Alkes captures Plainville 200. Alkes sweeps Twin 50s. And this simple headline appearing over and over and over, Alkes wins again. There were some interesting photos too, including one from the day in 1966 when Dave, aboard his own coupe, finished second to Billy Greco at the Eastern States Fairgrounds. And a shot of Dickie Benson's number 94 Pinto, which carried Alkes to a mid-1970s Monadnock Speedway victory over the likes of Punky Karen, Pete Fiandaca, and Dynamite Ollie Silva. Clearly, Alkes had the stuff to run up front anywhere, but he stuck mostly to Plainville. See, in those days, Plainville's engine rules limited everybody to a slightly puffed up 327. So hauling to high-speed tracks like Thompson and Stafford was a waste of time. Besides, Alkes was a working guy, serving as a field mechanic for some 40 years for the H.O. Penn Company in his native Berlin, Connecticut. Skipping a day's work to run someplace like Albany, Saratoga, never mind skipping several days or a week to compete at Trenton or Martinsville, was out of the question. And so Dave Alkes remained a Saturday night hero, which to me is a sacred description. The biggest modified headlines in the high-flying 60s and 70s went to drivers who traveled more, raced 4 nights a week, and won NASCAR championships. Charland, McTavish, Hamilton, DeCero, Stevens, Evans. Those guys deserved all their glory, no doubt about that. But if they were the bricks in the foundation for institutions like this Hall of Fame, then Saturday night heroes like Dave Alkes were the mortar. So Dave, thank you. Thank you for all those wonderful summer nights and all those amazing come-from-behind victories. Thank you for being the kind of reliable, year-in and year-out hero that every Saturday night track needs. Coincidentally, and he doesn't know this man won the first stock car race I ever saw. So for me, it's a huge personal honor to introduce the newest member of the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame, Mr. Dave Alkes.
Well, of course, everybody that knows me, I'm really tongue-tied most of the time, and I don't take much time up. So plan on being here for about a half an hour or so. No, I won't do that to you. First, I'd love to thank Bones for the induction. I mean, he's a wonderful job. Couldn't do it any better myself, except adding a few other things to it. I got to mention Ronnie Carlson. He brought a replica of the car out here first, so I don't forget. And Ronnie's done a lot of work in building that replica car, which he shows throughout the New England. Very nice job, and I have to give him a lot of thanks for bringing that car up here today. Just put it on display. So I thank Ronnie. Also, Plainville really wasn't that bad, you know. We could, I'm going to introduce you to my family. And back when I raced at Plainville, like Dave and the rest of them, hard shoes to fill, but I met my wife over there, believe it or not. So it couldn't have been that wild. She's a very calm girl. Paula, my wife, was a little girl, a freckle-faced girl, came with Ronnie Mayer. And Ronnie himself had his girlfriend, and they both went, his girlfriend and my wife went to Newington High School. And of course, she came, they brought her, drag her along with him, and he would root for Ronnie. And my wife would come down the pits and say, Jesus, you know, Ronnie, can you introduce me to this driver? Can you introduce me? So I saw this freckle-faced little girl. Of course, to begin with, I was a farmer. And farmers, they called me Farmer Brown when I first started racing over there. And so we were from the bottom all the way up. So my wife was kind of timid and all, and so we got to know each other, which we've been married for 39 years and very happy. I met her, I would say 43, 44 years ago. So I've got to say, Plainville wasn't that bad, really. Not to me, anyways. Secondly, I've got to introduce my family. Here I got my sister Irene and her husband Donald. I got to say, I got, of course, my younger brother Fred and his wife Kathy, and the younger generation, the younger Fred Jr. and his newly wife, and a neighbor of mine, Tom Wheeler, Pat. And I've got to continue on thanking Roland Sear and his wife Pat. I mean, of course, he didn't have to worry at that time. I used to bring the car home, as rough as we were, pretty much in one piece. And if I didn't, Roland always would work midnight candles to get that car going. Sometimes open shows on Wednesday, we'd get bent up a little bit. We never missed a race. That fellow worked day and night. And I don't know how Pat put up with him. And he would always come back. And maybe it was the winning that made him come back all the time. But for Roland being a car owner for me and keeping the wheels under me was quite a privilege. Of course, we had Dickie Benson, which Dick is over here. The car I drove was a 94, which was one that only 2 people drove. Gene Bergen drove that first. It was the original 2X, or one of the 2X Pintos that Bobby Judkins put together. And I felt thrilled to actually be able to drive that car. And Ed Flemke was in it also, Ed Flemke Sr. Trying to think of everything, and I've got to say, we had, on the way up here, I had an experience that started to give me a flashback of Eastern states. This is many, many years ago, and I want to say 20 years or so. We were coming up through Cromwell, Route 91. We're going along about 71 miles an hour coming up. I happened to glance to the left. I looked, and I said, this marker number looks awful familiar. It said Mod 43 on it. Mod 43, that's Billy Greco. So I says to my wife, well, we've got to duplicate what we did up Eastern States. I'm going to slide alongside of him on the right-hand side because I come in second to him and I says, I don't want to pass him. And so we pulled up alongside of Billy, give him a wave. I don't know if he remembered it or not. And his co-pilot kind of gave me a wave. And I says to my wife, I got to tell this to the people here, you know. But the folks over here, I really, really appreciated the whole organization of NEAR, new and old inductees. And I really appreciate this award. And also, don't want to forget all my friends. I am also now in the Berlin Lions Club, which my wife and I and the Lions members have diligently put a museum together. Beautiful museum, big building, 60 feet wide and 120 feet long. It's in from the fast mode to the slow mode. Right now we're in tractors. Right? I'm preserving the agricultural heritage of Berlin. Got 42 tractors in there. If you guys ever get a chance to come down, please, it's free. You're more than welcome. It's a state-of-the-art museum, and we're building it constantly. We're constantly adding to it. Also, I want to thank all my Berlin Lions members who come down here. There's 20 or so fold over here with 2 tables that came down. And also, I want to mention my good buddy, back when we first started out, Ronnie Wyckoff. I know Bones had also, he mentioned it, and I says, I remember we called him Smiley back then, and he had a few other names that I can't mention. But Ronnie came up from Hialeah, Florida, back in '59, and him and Janice, one of his several wives, but came up from, I'm only joking, came up from Florida, and that no-neck joke, that came from him. I've been wearing that albatross a long time. So with that, I say thanks everybody. I hope I didn't miss anybody.
Now our next presenter, he came up with not only a great race, but he was one of the people who came up with a great name for a race, the Spring Sizzler, which has gone on from 1972 and is still going on strong today. But I think his biggest contribution, you know, a lot of people have gotten books for Christmas presents or for birthday presents. There's a good chance if it's about racing, it came from Coastal 181, as he has published many outstanding racing publications, and today he's ready to make an outstanding induction speech. Let's bring up Lou Boyd.
Hi, everybody. You know, it's been said that the real shakers and movers in life all seem to have three distinct qualities: energy, enthusiasm, and curiosity. And there's no question that our next inductee has all of them, Dick Berggren. But all of this puts me in a little bit of a jam up here. And that's because I'd really have to carry on for some time to tell you about this guy fully. But meanwhile, Bruce Cohen and Pete Newsham are timing me, so I gotta cut some awful fast laps here. And it's really hard to tell you, to think about what I should really tell you. If I had time, I'd certainly like to tell you how he grew up in Manchester, Connecticut, in modest circumstance, working in the tobacco fields down there to make ends meet, and how absolutely the best day of his life was his birthday, when he got a spaghetti dinner and 2 seats on the dusty grandstands at Stafford. And I wish I could tell you about Manchester High School with his college counselor, his high school counselor, who told him he'd never amount to anything. And somehow, by 1970, he had a master's and a PhD from Tufts University. I sure wish I could tell you about the day he won his first race. Oh my God. Open competition at Lakeville Speedway. Well, I want you to know, coming back from that one, Bergie was pretty happy, and he had his belly pretty full of beer. And we came up Route 9 to a stoplight, and he felt that he needed to get out of that truck, still dressed in his fire suit, covered with dirt, oil, and grime, and go tell those unsuspecting girls in the car in front of us that he just won the feature. Well, about that time, Bruce Cohen and I had pretty much had enough, so we just kept right on going and left him on Route 9 waving his arms. But I would have to also tell you that a few years later at Beach Ridge, in that sprint car at Doug Gore, Bergie was scary fast. And he really earned those handles, Dr. Dirt and the Rolade Rocket. And we should also, of course, talk about Stock Car Racing magazine and how this guy could have joined as a freelance writer in 1968, within a couple of years, be editor. In 1999, all of a sudden be the National Press Association's Motorsports Writer of the Year. By the way, along the way, starting Open Wheel magazine, and now the industry-leading Speedway Illustrated. Hardly a journalistic award he hasn't won. And, you know, of course, if I did that, I'd have to tell you about the day at Arundel Speedway when the announcer didn't show up. Up to the announcer's booth, Bergie. Well, what do you think he made of that opportunity? How many times have you seen this guy on CBS, TNN, Speed, Fox TV? And you know, it ain't always been easy. How about being Bergie that day on the start-finish line at the Daytona 500, when all of a sudden, over his intercom comes his voice and it says, "Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the start of this race has been delayed for 5 minutes due to technical difficulties. Dick Berggren, keep everybody entertained." And of course, we'd have to talk about him getting curious about cameras, getting a camera and suddenly being the first photographer at Star Speedway, and starting a career of literally hundreds and thousands of photos documenting the evolution of racing. Photographic libraries of his friends, the families, and their children. And to be honest with you, I'd have to say some pretty nice images of a lot of nudes along the way, a lot prettier than Bruce Cohen and me. But to do Dick justice, we'd also have to point something else out. And that is, and this is really saying something, he's probably seen more laps of racing than anybody in this room. Any Saturday night that you guys might have gotten home early and rolled into your couch and popped open a beer, this guy was out on some little dirt track in Iowa or it might have been California Speedway. But he was out there recording it all for all of us. So you can see how I've had a little bit of a jam. So what I decided is I was going to tell you just two things. The first thing is that every vortex of energy needs a centering point so there won't be a flame out. And Bergie got his early. It came on a day in 1958. It was the best day of his life. His buddy Jimmy Coyle set him up with a blind date at Burger Chef. It was instant chemistry. Kathy Berggren's sitting here today with us, and I'll tell you, she's one of the loveliest, most gentle women ever to grace a seat board. Come and see her a little bit later. She's really, really a cutie. The second thing, I'd like to tell you a story that is absolutely classic Dick Berggren. I don't think 3 or 4 people in the world ever knew that this happened, but I was there. At the NASCAR race at Phoenix last spring, they had a Thursday night show. It was televised. It was one of those Busch East, Busch West races, and everybody thought, God, this is going to be a snore. Because at that point, the Busch Series was just full of all these development drivers with all kinds of Winston Cup money, and nobody had ever heard of any of them. But it turned out to be a great race. And Joey Logano with Joe Gibbs's money really went after Matt Kovaluk, and it was a good thing. But the star of the race was this guy nobody had heard of from California named David Mayhew. And this guy drove brilliantly until he blew. Well, when that happened, Bergie went running over with all the cameras and microphones, and he was carrying on and said, okay, David, that was really cool. How are you going to be all set for the next race? And David Mayhew came clean. He said, the fact is, I don't have any second motor. I don't have any second car. I haven't even got enough money to get the tolls to go back over those mountains to California. As soon as the cameras went off, when nobody was looking, Bergie reaches into his wallet, pulls out all his money, gives it to David Mayhew, and goes running off to the next interview. Well, I talked to David Mayhew, and he just couldn't believe it. His jaw was on the pavement. But mine wasn't, because I know that Bergie's done thousands of things for this sport and in support of its people just like that over the years. Dick Berggren, racer, race fan, writer, photographer, TV celebrity, philanthropist, wonderful friend to all of us. Please join me in a great big round of applause for Dick Berggren as he comes up to this podium and walks into the Near Hall of Fame forever.
Roy and Mary Eldridge, thank you for bringing my sprint car out here. We really appreciate it. That is the real car, by the way, that's out front that we ran at Beech Ridge Speedway in the early 1970s. It's been a long time since a sunny Sunday afternoon in 1953 when my father took me to Stafford Speedway to see my very first auto race. Art Russo, who is in this Hall of Fame, finished second that day to Whitey Brainerd, who drove a cut-down with a straight-eight Buick engine that was bigger than all of the rest of the car put together, and my imagination ran off. The cars seemed to my childhood eyes to be more colorful than any artist could possibly paint them. The drivers, larger-than-life heroes, the noise, mind-rattling, and I knew that day I wanted to be a racer. When I was still in graduate school, I started racing. It began with a car numbered 9L for the 9 lives of Harry the Cat, who had owned it, and who sold it to me along with 1 spare tire, talk about a deal, for $225. I ended that first season wadded up in the wooden fence at Stafford Speedway, the last car on the last lap to ever run before the track's dirt was replaced with pavement. Wally Pettengill helped me when I was a student. He worked on the cars, patched up my welding, and explained some of the basics of driving. There have been so many others along the way who have given of their time to help me. Lou and I shared a garage in Framingham in the 1970s. And during those days, we would meet in Boston and carpool out to our little rented garage, I was a college professor at the time, and Lou was working for Harvard University as a fundraiser. Late at night, turned the lights out in the garage. It was off to a place called the Happy Swallow and Frosties, many of them. I learned a lot about drinking beer from Lou Boyd. I also learned a lot about racing on the cheap, but more importantly, I've learned an awful lot about life itself. Doug Gore was there the day I won my first and last stock car race, Lakeville, with the big block modified. And Doug was with me all the way with the sprint car that's sitting outside. Those were the best days and nights of my life. If I get to heaven, which admittedly is a long shot, and God told me I could relive just a little bit of my life, and what would I pick? Without a doubt, give me a few laps in that car at Beech Ridge. I'll also tell you that Doug saved my life with that car. Came with a bolt-on cage, and one winter he decided that bolt-on cage had to go, and he re-welded the cage to the frame. If you look at the pictures that are with that car, you'll see we took a huge hit one day at Beech Ridge, and without the cage having been welded instead of bolted, I have absolutely no doubt I wouldn't be here. As for the glamour of racing on local short tracks, there were many nights when I towed to the racetrack with only my dog as a helper. And there were so many nights when I would pull into Beech Ridge and Mike Sargent and his late wife Sandy would be waiting for me. That was my crew. Russ Conway, you're over there somewhere, gave me my very first announcing job, Arundel Speedway on Friday night. Well, I was also the track photographer and I was the track's PR man. So I had 3 jobs in one night. And I would finish announcing one of the heats and I'd run like mad down the grandstand, out there, grab the camera, take a picture, run back up again, grab hold of the microphone. And ladies and gentlemen, on the outside of the 4th row for the next heat, it's whatever it might be. Mike Joy has done more for my television career than anybody else. He encouraged me, he opened doors, and he gave me a role model to look up to. Ken Squire rescued my television career when it was all but done. My agent in New York, Sharon Chang, got me an interview with Fox Sports president Ed Gorin in 2000. It was an interview I never could have gotten by myself, and without it, my television career would have ended when Fox and NBC took over NASCAR in 2001. I owe a lot to my father. I tried so hard to win his approval and make him proud of me. And little did I know, he told everybody else he was proud of me. But he never told me, so I kept on digging. And my long-suffering, still suffering wife, Kathy. We did meet on a blind date in high school, still together. And I'll tell you this story. The Friday night when we got married, I tried to persuade her that a very good way to spend or to begin our married lives together was to go to Stafford Speedway on the way to the honeymoon. Push the issue right up to the exit for the Speedway, and when she went silent, I knew that we were not spending our wedding night at the racetrack. Although we've been married for 43 years, in reality I've been gone about half of it, so I guess we've really only been married for about 20 years. And for all the travel and all the nights away from home, she's never once complained. Nor did she complain when I spent her paychecks on engines and tires, and I did that for years, the whole paycheck. Jim Moffitt gave me my start in print journalism. Rich Benyo helped me get a job as the editor of Stock Car Racing magazine in 1977. Without both of them, I would have had a very different career, probably outside auto racing. My reason for telling you all of this is to make clear that I have had a lot of help from a lot of people who have not asked for anything in return. Racing is like that. People you don't see, people you don't know, have a lot to do with the success of those who stand in the spotlight. Now that I'm in the autumn of my racing days, I've learned to appreciate what Lou Boyd, Sharon Chang, Wally Pettengill, Ken Squire, Kathy Bergman, my father, Mike Joy, and so many others have done for me. The highlight, the headline of it all, is that the love of my life has put up with all this crap and she's still here. As for the rest, it's been a privilege to work with people who I have admired and looked up to for so long. Darrell Waltrip, Lou, Eli Gold, Ken Squire, Doug Gore, Carl Fredrickson, and so many more. Racing has taken me all over America. I've been to the Knoxville Nationals in Iowa, the Indianapolis 500, Daytona, and even the upper stories of the CBS Black Rock skyscraper in New York and the News Corp building where Fox is located. And to Japan. I love the big events, and I'm looking forward to being part of the broadcast team that will cover this year's Daytona 500. But the truth of the matter is, the short tracks are where my heart is. So Thursday night at Thunder Road, Friday night at Stafford, Saturday night at Beach Ridge or some little dirt track someplace I've never been to. That's what it's all about. Bentley Warren, Jeff Horn, A.J. Foyt, Bug Stevens, my childhood hero Art Russo, Nolan Swift, Steve Kinzer, Bobby Allison, Scott Bloomquist, Eddie Flemke, Steve Carlson, Tony Stewart, Wild Bill Slater, Garrett Evans, Richard Petty, Bill Wimble, Ted Christopher, Dale Earnhardt, both of them, Ralph Cusack, Jeff Gordon, Ernie Gahan, Brett Hearn, Rip Michaels, Dave Lape, Rainey Charland, and so many others have thrilled me with their courage and their skill, and they have enriched my life through the sheer joy of having watched them perform. I have been privileged to tell stories of each of them. So today has presented an opportunity to say thank you for the many who have helped me along life's road. I am very grateful and very appreciative. It's been a grand run, a run that's not over yet. There are more stories to tell, more victory lane interviews to conduct, more pit stops to call, more photographs to be taken, and more races to see. I'll do my best to not screw it up.
Now, our next presenter has a pretty amazing accomplishment. He is a member of 2 Hall of Fames, the National Hockey League Hall of Fame and the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. And here's the most incredible part about it. He hasn't been thrown out yet of either one of them. Our next presenter, Russ Conway.
It's a sheer delight, as always, to be a part of what is done here each and every year. The dedicated people with NEAR, all the great people. I mean, look around, as people have been saying all day, and you bump into people you haven't seen in a long while. I mean, you know, Billy Wimble, you look at him, he's a gentleman. He's around, there's red in that red tie, Billy. I'd like to look like that at your age, I'm telling you. And Ernie Gahan, and so many people, Bill Slater, and even Eddie West. Eddie West dressed up for this thing. It's pretty good. Congratulations all. And it is especially a proud moment to be up here with today with the class of '08, including Dick Batchelder, Dick Berggren, and of course the late Howard Brown. The 3 Bs of the New England Supermodified Racing Association, and finally history has changed that, because for many, many years, if there were 3 Bs associated with NESMRA, the reputation was Budweiser, booze, and broads. However, Howard Brown wasn't into any of that. Howard Brown was a true champion, a very competitive guy. He was the John Wayne character. Not as tall, but every bit leather-neck tough. Guts, grit, bow-legged walk. He was tough, all right. And when it came to underdogs, he became more of a race driver than most. Howard Brown, often overshadowed by Flash, Dash, and Cash, went on to a career that was very special. A former Golden Gloves boxer, he started racing jalopies in 1949 at the old Newmarket, New Hampshire Speedway. And he went on to race throughout New England, New York, Florida, Canada, before retiring after the 1986 season. His biggest success came driving the number 069 bomber for Hummer Harvey. I never knew how he got his name Hummer, and I never asked. And the number 77 Epping Express of Lauren Valley, who's here today, and Dan Dexter, and also the 77 Supermodified for Tim Featherin. But as I said, Howard Brown was tough. How tough was he? I remember a night very distinctly in 1964 at Arundel Speedway on the back straightaway during the last warm-up session in front of the pits. Howard Brown rolled. It looked as though a right front wheel or something got under the car, maybe something broke. And anyways, he flipped side over side, and fenders flying, and the hoods flying, and nuts and bolts. And it was a terrible wreck. And when it was all over, I go down into the infield, and this wrecker guy's clearing him up, and they're carting Howard off to the hospital, unconscious, really worried about him. And I said to the guy, geez, that was awful, huh? He says, yeah, never seen nothing like it, eh? And I said, no. I said, geez, that's quite a wreck. No, I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about the stock car. I never saw a stock car with 5 wheels. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, he says, look here, 2 of them fell off the front end, 2 are on the car, and 1's still inside the car. Well, as it was, they used to carry wheels inside the car. He was late getting to the track, and 1 of them was still inside the car when he was out doing his last one. In 1966, he had a terrible crash at the Lee Tri-Oval track. First time I ever saw a compound fractured leg in my life. And I went over to him, and he's on the stretcher, and they're just loading him up in the stretcher. And I said, Brownie, you'll be all right. And he looks at me, and he's gritting his teeth, and he says, I can still kick your ass. Just like that. And I said, don't try using that leg right now. He come back afterwards. He kicked me with his cast. During that time, he liked to fish. And he's down in Epping, New Hampshire. And the world heavyweight champion, former ex-champion, Jack Sharkey, lived in Epping. And they're both fishing for the same trout, and they're having a big fight, back and forth with each other. Finally, Brown said to him, you fish from over there, and I'll fish from over here. That's the kind of guy he was. He was so competitive. Well, after some time, he got his chance. Bentley Warren put him in a super modified at Westboro Speedway. And Brown went out and he ran the thing. And by the way, for those who think you get your chance young, that you better make of it, the first time Howard Brown was ever in a super modified, he was 37 years old. Well, he went out and he ran that super modified, and he ran a lot of super modified races over the years, and the question became, it went from not how tough is he to how good is he. And he became very competitive, as I said. In 1969, Lauren Valley put him in the number 77, which later became the Epping Express. The very first night out in that car, he won his feature race. Later on in 1970, he opened up the season with a win, a 50-lap feature win at Stafford Motor Speedway. Later on, at the end of the year, he won the 100-lap World Series when we used to put the supers and the modifieds together. And in between, in that season, he won on the 5/8 mile at Briar Motorsport Park. He went on to become the 3rd leading all-time winner in NESMA history. He won, these are not made-up numbers or guesses or estimates. He won 93 feature events with us, 3rd all-time in history behind Ollie Silva and Ed West. He won approximately 130 feature events that we know of, and many more probably we don't know of. He won in 13 different speedways, throughout New England, as well as Bathurst, New Brunswick. Howard Brown, his pinnacle came in 1977. He won the 150-lap Nesmer Canadian American Classic Supermodified race at Star Speedway, where he had also won 3 track championships. Well, he won that race coming from 5th to 1st in the final 14 laps. And when it was all over, he had a hard time getting out. It took some time getting out of the car, and we're trying to move the show on, and finally he got out. Well, come to find out, he had one of those old Chevy steering boxes in the car. And if you ever tried to drive your automobile right now, just turn on the ignition without starting it up, and that's kind of what that was like. And he'd driven almost the final 75 laps without any power steering in that super modified. It was an amazing thing, and more amazing was 2 years earlier at Volusia Motor Speedway on the dirt in Florida in Red McDonald's car. He had finished 3rd in a dirt race, a dirt super modified event with sprint cars, had a very serious heart attack that cost him that season. He came back the very next year and won the feature race, his very first feature race out. I can tell you many more Howard Brown stories, some that are non-race related, some that are. However, he became a race driver after many people would have left the sport, and he became very good at it. He drove everything there ever was to drive with wheels on it, and drove it with a passion. Didn't always have the best equipment, but he was really good at what he did. Howie Brown passed away in 1987 after a fight with cancer. He was survived by his wife Maxine, 4 daughters, 3 sons, one of whom was predeceased by himself, Freddie, who was a driver that unfortunately lost his life at Lee USA Speedway. But through it all, he really cared about racing. And by the way, his family members are here at this table, I believe. You want to stand up just a second, because we're going to bring a couple of you up here in just a moment. Howie Brown probably never thought he'd be in the Hall of Fame. Howie Brown, I don't really think ever knew how good he was as a race driver. He became very good at what he did. And Ken Smith and I were talking about it earlier. Howie Brown was never on the racetrack a single problem to anybody. He raced hard, but he wasn't a crasher, and he wasn't a banger, and he went out and he did a lot of good racing. And surely, his gritty legacy is more than deserving of this recognition. I would like to call up Heidi Brown and Billy Osborne, who now, as a 3rd generation Brown, this year won the All-Star Speedway Roadrunner Division Season Championship, to accept Howard Brown's induction into the Near Hall of Fame.
Hi, thank you, Russ, so much. I'm not a talker at all. I print more on racing paper and all that. I have a lot to say, but I can't say it in front of all you people, but thank you so much for this. I can't even talk, but thanks. And I know my father watches us every day, because I've been pretty successful in my racing career and since my father died, and I've never gotten a scratch through it all, through enduro racing with all the guys. And now my son is involved in it, and I just read in this paper today, and I didn't realize it, in this little magazine here, that My son actually tied with 22 feature wins in one season, as my father did, and I didn't even know that. So this will be the next round to carry my father's name. So thank you guys very much.
Now, if they ever made a movie about the history of the Northeast Midget Association, this man would be providing the soundtrack because he was the announcer of NEMA for about 25 years. He also served as president, vice president, treasurer. Now he's a head historian and storyteller. So I think the M in NEMA stands for two things: midgets and Monahan. Dick Monahan will be making our next presentation.
You know, one of the things that I realized tonight for the first time sitting here listening to these, all these talks about these guys, one of the great things that being with the midgets did for me is the fact that we traveled all over the place. I've seen all these guys run. I mean, I'm sure that some of you guys from Connecticut never saw some of the guys from Maine that got it, or the guys from Vermont, or vice versa. We ran all these tracks, and we got to see these guys that now get honored, guys who made the decision for whatever reasons, families, businesses, and all that, to just stay home and enjoy their auto racing and not travel all over the world. Although Lord knows we certainly honor those guys too. It's been a great time here in New England. And every time a bunch of us old-time midget fogies get together, the conversation always turns to what we think is a lack of characters in today's racing. I know some of you are going to say there are still a few, but trust me. In our day, many of the cars themselves were unique machines with charisma and history, and we could trace the histories of cars through who had owned them and the drivers who had been in them and the wrecks they'd been in and who'd rebuilt the car and what pieces of it were still there from the old days and what's new. The drivers themselves had lots of characters. And Nick, I mean, just in the midgets, nobody would confuse a guy like Al Pillion with Billy Eldridge or Ray Roberts or Ray Burke. Each one had a very unique personality, usually very outsized personality. But neither the cars nor the drivers could really compete with the owners. The owners of the guys, I mean, think about this in all classes. They burn the midnight oil. They bust their knuckles to squeeze out a few pounds or find a few more horsepower. And what they're really doing is building a toy for the drivers to go out and play with. And as a result, maybe you got to be a little different to be a race car owner. We've honored a few of them, and that's generally the way they're described. One of the ones that was one of the most outsized characters in the history of the Northeastern Midget Association was the guy we're here to honor tonight, Iron Mike Scrivani. He started in beautiful downtown Oakland Beach, growing up with Hop Harrington. And they were boyhood buddies. At one point, they had TQ races together. Hop claimed that the only time Mike ever beat him was when he cut through the infield to do it, which sounds typical. And we all remember during the period that Mike ran the famous truck stop. But when he started in racing, he was a truck driver. A guy could run really competitive Class A race cars on a truck driver's salary in those days. A lot harder to do now. The number 21 that he made famous on his race cars was originally the number on his truck. He first got into big car racing, bought a Hal Dio Sprinter, ran that for a while with Jimmy Green before, like so many other people with sprint cars not doing so well, decided that midgets would be a lot more interesting because they had a lot more races. He bought a V8 60 midget. He wanted to work on it in the carport next to the house, but there wasn't room. And his wife said no, he wasn't going to change anything. So he waited till she went out for groceries, took a chainsaw, and hacked the back of the carport out so he had room for the midget. He was a charter member of NEMA, running its very first race at Seekonk on Memorial Day weekend in 1953. Jerry Russo drove that first car to a number of wins. Next, Mike bought the famous McLeod number 20 that had been driven by Johnny Thompson. He bought it from Oscar Ridland, another famous name in midget racing. Bill Eldridge, Ray Burke, Al Pillion, Tony Bonadias, Al Herman, Joe Chickey, Dave Humphrey, all drove that car all over New England, New York, and New Jersey. He not only ran NEMA, he ran ARDC. When you look at today's tow rigs, it's hard to believe that a successful owner towed all those miles with a car on an open trailer behind an old Swagon. During the 60s, when midget racing slowed down a little, Mike bought the famous M2 modified from Bernie Barrows. Proving it could be successful in more than one class of cars, Mike installed Leo Cleary behind the wheel and won both the Norwood and Thompson championships. Later, old pal Hop Harrington drove it to some more wins. Then Mike got back into midget racing because he always really loved the midgets. Butch Walsh and Dave Humphrey chauffeured this round. Walsh won the NEMA title in the car in '73, and Noki Fenoro, who's here today, won it in '81. But Mike didn't win the owner's title because he wasn't a member of the club. In keeping with his reputation of being a real character, he didn't agree with some of the policies, so he was damned if he'd pay the dues for the club, so he didn't get the car owner's points. The family title appears on the NEMA ranks because Mike Jr. finally won the title with Dave Humphrey in 1978. Mike helped a lot of people. Fred DeSaro was one of his proteges. When Ray Burke came back after being badly hurt at Danbury, Mike kept him in the ride until he won an A main, just so Ray could prove to himself he could still do it. At which point, by the way, Ray retired. One of my friends tells the story of accompanying a NEMA car owner to Mike to get a part that Mike had offered to give him that he really needed. Mike says, sure, it's over at the house. So they follow Mike over to the house, and he starts going through closets. He's going through the coat closets. He's going through the bureau drawers. He's looking in the kitchen cabinets. They're all full of parts. The whole house was full of midget parts. He finally found it under the kitchen sink. They took the parts and went away. And then at one point in the 70s, Mike owned an upright that was wrenched by Mike Jr. and a Badger wrenched by Hop Harrington. One of the great nights in probably NEMA history, and certainly in the Scrivani family history, saw Johnny Coy in the upright pass Jeff Bodine, of all people, in the Badger on the last lap for the win at Thompson. We lost Iron Mike almost 25 years ago on February 28, 1983. But we have all these memories and many, many more. He is a most deserving inductee into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. Accepting for him is his son, the current NEMA president, Mike Scrivani Jr.
Thanks, Dick. I'd like to thank Pete Sinati for nominating my father and all the people who voted and all the people here for NEA. I mean, this is a big family and a lot of memories. I'll tell you, it's been this is an honor, I'll tell you. It's tough, but if anybody knew my father, he was hard on the outside, soft on the inside. I can't repeat what he would say, but I'd be in trouble. Probably get escorted out of here. But he had some good memories back, the modifieds in Norwood. He enjoyed it. Leo was the first driver I drove for him. He really enjoyed it. He had some good times with him. Regardless, Leo come in the pits all teed off and spit all over the old man. And he's saying, boy, he's mad. Dashboard all kicked in, but Leo went out and did the job, And we realized what Leo did, it was right. And we blew the motor up. The old man said, you know what, you're trying. We don't care. We'll get you another one next week. And it goes back to some old stories, with the old modified guys. I like to know how Eddie Flimpy Sr. got the old man's hat off all the time. He'd be yelling at him, calling him a little SOB, and chasing around the parking lot. Then, the Bugsy that always tormented the old man. He was just, they had a good relationship at Norwood. It was like a big family. Then, Gene Burgeon, he drove my father's car at Thompson for a feature win that was unbelievable. Then the following week, Gene just told me this story, and I forgot all about it, but it was a good one. The old man drives up to Wall Stadium. Gene meets him there. The old man drives in with a limousine. with wine and crackers and cheese. Gene says, "Oh my God, I'm in trouble now. I can't even put a scratch in this car or else I'm gonna be killed. I won't make it past the gate." But that's all the memories that, you know, he shined. He always wanted to be the best he could be, you know, wherever he wanted to race in. I got locked in the garage a couple of times, literally locked in the garage when I didn't do the job right. And he was perfection. He just wanted to be right. And he taught a lot of people, you know, and if you think you was going to pull something over on him, forget about it. I might have told him a couple things wrong, and he said, "You know what? You're wrong. I know you're lying to me." And he was right. He knew what was going on. You couldn't hide nothing from him. He was just a perfection, that's all. In the last year, when Noki Fenora won the championship in ARDC on dirt, he completed one thing. You know, the championship, you know, and then the following year he passed away. And he wanted to do something and he set out to do it. You know, and I lost my family and friends and everybody that worked with him and worked around him. We lost a great person. I lost my best friend. So I like to say, you know, thanks for everybody for putting him in the Hall of Fame. It's a great honor. Thank you.
I was just thinking of something while all these speeches were going on. How many people have been watching any of the 24 Hours of Daytona? Have anybody been tuning in? Well, a lot of people. How about this team for next year? We can have Dave Darvo, Dave Alkis drive it, Dick Batchelder, he'd be behind the wheel, Johnny Gamble, George Lombardi, Fred Lucchese, they'd be our drivers. Of course, we would have Joe Brady, he would be working on the car. Pete Zanardi could be the rider. We would have a special microphone in the car so Dick Berggren could drive and announce at the same time. We'd be inspired by the memory of Howard Brown and Mike Scrivani Sr. Could we be beat? I don't think so. But there is one problem. We would need someone to finance it. And that's where our next presenter comes in, because he is a banker. He is also one of the founders of NESMA, and he's also a member of the New England Racing Hall of Fame. Let's bring up Ken Smith.
Hey, the last shall be first. When I get done this 10-page prepared remarks, you can all have another drink. Now for a few words about another outstanding driver and owner, a charter member of NESMA, and a 30-year veteran of going around in circles, Richard Batchelor. Racing Richard, Dick, or Batch, as he is called, was the oldest of 10 children, growing up on a farm. His roots, and believe this one or not, his roots can be traced all the way back to 1642. No, he's not quite that old. When the first Batchelor settled in the New Hampshire town of Northampton, Dick acquired his love for racing when his father and uncle took him to the old Dover Speedway in New Hampshire. Upon seeing cars like the 14 of Freddie Schultz, the L1 of Red Barbo, the Lazy 2 of Freddie Lucchese, the Flying 5 of Smokey Boutwell, and many of the other great drivers of the day, flying around the tight quarter-mile track, he knew that his calling, what his calling was. And as soon as he graduated from high school, he was on his way to the Pine Speedway with a 1931 Chevy Coupe, which he promptly wrecked. He then hooked up with Ernie Norman, driving a GMA C 6-cylinder, which he drove to the first feature victory in Dover in 1960 that paid $35, and he thought he was a millionaire. In 1965, I first met Dick under very unusual circumstances. It was a Saturday night in June at the Pine Speedway in Groveland. This was the same night that our super modified club, NESMA, was born. When all the Class A cut-down owners and drivers decided to boycott the night's races unless the payoff was increased. Where have we heard that before? Well, fat chance. Of course that didn't happen. And Dick and his brother-in-law, Roaring Roy, showed up that evening with 2 new cars and joined up with the rest of the NESMA members like NERA Hall of Famers, Ollie Silver, Don McLaren, Eddie West, Bentley Warren. That year, Dick campaigned his home-built cut-down at every NESMA race without winning a feature event. With only 1 race remaining at the old Lee Raceway in 1965, Dick sold his car, and the new owner was going to have Howie Brown drive it. Well, something went wrong with the communications, and Howie had another ride that day. So when Batch arrived at the track as a spectator, he was quickly asked if he wanted to drive his former car one more time. And of course he said yes, and promptly went out and won his first of many NESMA feature events. Dick has often been ribbed about his first NESMA win, something like this. Gee, Dick, once you found someone else to pay the bills, you took some chances and finally drove that car up to its full potential. And indeed he did, and he won his first of many, many events. Dick went on from that by owning and maintaining several different cars, establishing a highly successful reputation for being a consistently clean, smooth, patient, intelligent, and competitive driver. He rarely wrecked or had his equipment break, and nearly always was a top 5 finisher. This country gentleman brought a driving style to the track that could easily be compared to today's Matt Kenseth on the NASCAR circuit. A few of Dick's many highlights over the years are listed in your program book. Dick is proud of the fact that he had no serious injuries from racing, never spent a night in the hospital, had a few sore Mondays. He has been married to his wife Judy for nearly 50 years. She has been by his side at tracks from Canada to Florida. Recently, Dick told a newspaper reporter that his wife Judy stuck with me good. I wonder what that really means. I'll have to find out afterwards. Judy and Dick have 3 grown children, Becky, Dick, and Jim, and a couple of grandchildren, all of whom are here today. And if you need a tractor, a dozer, a backhoe, or just want to do some bench racing and relive a few of the memories of the golden days of auto racing, drop in and see Dick and Judy at their Route 1 tractor sales in Northampton, New Hampshire, or their other location that is in Lebanon, Maine. Now, just before I ask Dick to come up here, I believe his sister, Roy Eldridge's wife, might have something to say. Might. Is that correct?
Thank you. To use the word proud doesn't seem strong enough to describe how I feel. I'm one of the lucky ones who are fortunate enough not only to know the honorees Dr. Dick and Howard Brown, but I also someone I've known all my life. I can remember hearing him singing Saturday mornings as he did his chores or worked on his vehicle in the driveway. We didn't have a garage. I can remember the field bomber rides down back in the woods on the farm, the rides in the old hay wagon down the big hill across the street just to see how fast they would go. It's a wonder we're all still alive. I can remember when you started racing and I'd get to go with Judy, a very gifted wife. The day you asked me to let her your race car, for whatever reason, you have no idea how proud I was. Going to the races and watching you was my introduction to racing world. Thanks to you, the friends I have made and the life with Roy is awesome. There are so many stories I could tell, but somehow there's never enough time. You are a kind, considerate, loving person, and thank you for this time to say, Dick Batchelor, I am so proud you are my brother, and I dearly love you.
Thank you, Mary. And with that, let's have Dick. It's my extreme pleasure to ask Richard Batchelor to come forward and post his Hall of Fame plaque and officially be inducted into the NERA Hall of Fame. Come on up here, Richard.
I guess this is one of these guys, the older I get, the better I was. But I don't remember it this way. I'm trying to read Ken's notes instead of my own. some time ago, my wife asked me if, oh, by the way, is my fly closed? Every time I get an award, some smart ass on my pit crew hollers that my fly's open, so I check that. But some time ago, my wife asked me if I thought I'd ever be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and I said, nah, we live way up in Maine, we've been out of racing 20 years, nobody will remember me. And when Bruce called a short time ago to tell me, I said, wow, they must have got to the bottom of the barrel already. I thought there was a lot of good guys left. But he assured me that I was nominated and enough people voted on me, so here I am. And my story is no different than any of you other guys. I started racing Class Bs, did pretty good. And at that time, racing supers seemed logical because they were close by. I guess we called them cut downs then. And I don't think any of us ever aspired to go to Daytona or Indy or any place. And we were kind of a tight-knit little group. And when I asked what I was supposed to say up there, they said, tell stories, don't bore them with numbers. So I will do that. When Smith and Conway took over and started the racing, it was a legitimate deal. We made a few bucks. A guy like myself without much money, not too much talent, could win. Now and then they would pick up a special show, and if you won that, it would keep you going. And I really enjoyed it. One little story I got to tell you is, Smith called me one night and he says, we're going to Florida racing. Bring your car down. I said, geez, I don't have any money. You know, I'm a married guy, it's the middle of winter. He said, well, we'll guarantee you the money to get home if you get there. So we left, a buddy of mine named Pudge, who's since deceased, and off we went. I think the only spare we had was the tire for the trailer. And I was really getting around Miami Hollywood Speed Bowl. I thought I was going to set the pole, and the motor exploded. And to show you what it was like back then, Jimmy Landry come along, and he said, I got a motor if you got enough parts to put it together. So somebody found a fence post and a chain. We took the motor out. We built the motor. I guess we got it together. We did not qualify, so we had to start in the rear. Well, it's not a Cinderella story, but I got up to third, and that got us enough money to get home. And then I did pretty good the rest of the week, and I actually come up enough money to buy the motor. And we didn't race for the glory. We enjoyed it. I think the only time I was a little disappointed was I got a lot of advice from Ollie Silver. He was my idol. And he would tell me things that maybe he didn't tell anybody else. And one night, I won the feature. I don't remember if I passed Ollie or if I held him off. But I won, and Ollie was second. So at the time, the newspaper would put your picture in the paper and a little article about Joe Blow wins at such and such track. Well, I waited all week, and there it was on the second page, big in hell. Ollie Silver finishes second at Star Speedway. So that kind of puts you into place. I guess looking back, I'd be proud to say that anybody I ever drove for any length of time, I won them at least one feature. I preferred to run my own stuff because I've been known to win a feature and cut the car in half because I thought something would work better. And we all know you don't get through this without a lot of help. A lot of people have helped me over the years. I won't bore you with the names. You don't know most of them. Some of them passed away, but over there is Mike Sargent and Kenny Brown. They were with me through all the glory years. So, and my wife, I raced about 30 years, and I was trying to come up with something smart to say. And she has been to every race I ever raced at but two. And that was because we were way in hell and going up in Canada somewhere and couldn't find a babysitter or something. Howard Brown and I, 20 years later, are going into the Hall of Fame. I really think this is a big deal. I never realized how much a big deal it was till I got here. And I do appreciate it, and I think it's pretty neat. Thank you.
Well, we're just about ready to return you back to 2008. But I think it would be appropriate just to say thank you with one more hand for all the members, the New England Racing Hall of Fame class of 2008. We would like the class of 2008 to come up to the stage with all the other former Hall of Famers. You've been a great audience. It's been a very special day. So long from the Hall of Fame.